Hi, I'm Danger Dan Jers, the host and GM of the D&D Real Play podcast, D&D Dark. Join us on Wednesdays for an absurd, over-the-top comedy horror adventure, starring some of history's most infamous monsters.
I'm Ben Magnet. I play Mary Frankenstein, our barbarian.
I am Daniel Cruz. I am playing Imhotep the Mummy, our cleric.
I'm Jordan, and I play Larry Talbot, a lycanthropic warlock.
I am Grayson, playing Jet Griffin, the Invisible Man, the party's rogue.
I am Aaron. I play the Phantom of the Opera, our bard.
For more information, go to dndarkpodcast.com and listen to us anywhere you find podcasts.
Let's go. Master of all things tabletop. With the Paladins of Podcast. They ruin the games you love by talking rules that suck, how to build kick-ass encounters, destroy worlds, and really get your players invested. So go ahead and throw that fistful of dice at someone. Because we're going on a side quest.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to SideQuests with the Paladins of Podcast, Rob and Eli. How are we doing today?
Good. We're going to talk about our sessions a little bit, and then we have a review of the Universal Soldier, a cinematic source book from
Evil
Everyday
Genius
Heroes?
Games.
Yeah.
Yep, it's for Everyday Heroes by Evil Genius Games.
Awesome.
So,
how was your session, Rob?
So it was actually decent. We are now into the thick of December, and as we get closer to the Christmas holiday, because everybody in my group celebrates Christmas, we had a potluck and white elephant gift exchange, which is always fun. I mean, that's one of the benefits of the community building when you have a in-person group. So we really dig that. But the session itself, I also introduced the idea of Christmas lore into my game. So the Santa Claus is a curse, and it is bestowed oftentimes on the worst people as a way to help them redeem themselves in death. So to become the Santa Claus, curse initially spawned from a fey trickster who he used all of his last will and life force that he had left to curse an individual who was slaying him in battle. And that curse stuck with him, and he found that his goal was to actually end up protecting children and bring hope. It went against his very nature of being a destroyer, a death bringer, a harbinger of vile acts, etc. And it gets passed on when you kill the current Santa Claus for whatever reason, because you're a jerk, and then you become the Santa Claus. So right now, current Santa Claus is his name is Roden Connors, and he is a beefy dude with a bad attitude, hates everybody, hates everything, spends most of his time bare knuckle boxing. He's an absolute brute of a gentleman, full of tattoos. And the reason gift giving became a thing was because he found it was the best, easiest way to bring hope and joy to young kids, to give them something to believe in, to shield them from the violence that he had been accustomed to prior to the curse. So that's the Santa Claus in a nutshell in my game.
Fun. Yeah.
And my party ended up going up against him in a sparring match. He knocked everybody on their asses, left them all a small gift. And next session, they're going to, well, truthfully, today's Saturday, so next week's Saturday's game, right before Christmas, they're going to go up against Krampus.
That's a funny, like, take the gift of the fist and some gold.
Yes, loved it.
It's nice. That's a nice way to, I guess, work that into your game.
I
don't normally do a lot of like I don't try to like bring in like real world stuff, but oftentimes I'll do like in-game holidays.
Mm-hmm.
Like the players will come across festivals and whatnot.
Yeah, and we call it Christmas just because it's easier, but in game it's known as Winter Veil. So that is the holiday season. And it's fun. And like I said, there's a whole lore that I wrote to it. I sent it out to all the players and whatnot. And some of them are really into Christmas, so they're super excited. We'll see how it goes.
How often do you refer to it as Christmas as opposed to Winter Veil?
Outside a game, inside a game, I just Winter Veil.
Okay, yeah, because I almost like I did that for a while. Where like oh, we'll just call it by whatever its like other analogy is, and then I was like, man, maybe that's just harmful for like maintaining a cohesive like immersion. So I really try to stick to the in-game names for things as much as possible. So.
I do too. It really helps with that idea of engagement with the world that we were always talking about. And I also like referring to it as it's in-game terminology primarily because it helps divide that separation between reality and our fantasy world, which sometimes you need. You need that break. But on the flip side, the idea of referring to it as Christmas is nice because then people can equate certain joy and feelings towards it, but it's not the world's most joyous time for everybody. So depending on how cautious you want to be. And then again, another side of this multifaceted issue is if somebody absolutely loves the idea of Christmas, and my version right here of a bare knuckle boxing Santa Claus doesn't fit that, and I'm calling it Christmas, I could be ruining some aspect for them.
This is what Christmas is, just in the streets.
Right. So being able to call it Winter Veil, that helps.
Those the Salvation Army Santas have really gotten aggressive this year.
Oh God, there's so many bad jokes we can go with from there.
Okay.
How about you, Eli? How was your game?
My session was pretty great. Last time we talked about one of my players' curses for being on the water.
Okay.
And so this session, it was entirely on the boat. They got attacked by like a big sea monster, and I had planned to have the sea monster like it was a giant constricting one, so it would like wrapped around their ship and like started doing some like wild stuff, and the players would have had to try to get it off their ship and whatnot. However, like the first player like ran up and like leapt up and cast like a fear spell on the creature, and it just all went away. And I was like, no. Like on one hand, I was like so bummed out, but then on the other hand, it was a hugely epic moment for them. So I was like, awesome, like completely blindsided me. Worked really well.
I like that. Now, you made a mention there. I want to capitalize on for a second. You mentioned that as the player ran up, jumped, and cast the fear spell, the large monster failed to save or ended up under the effect. So he fled. He left. Therefore, ending the scenario. And it sounds like, as bummed out as you were, you are excited and you are celebrating your player's success there.
Yeah, because like on one hand, I worked on different like interactions that would work. Like, because you're not always on a boat that's being constricted by a serpent while being under attack. Like, there's just a lot of things going on, and I was like, okay, here's how I'm looking at how I'm going to handle all these things. Here's how I can make it interesting. Here's other ways that they can interact with this monster besides just like, I hack the scales. So like on one hand, like I'm bummed out I wasn't able to use those things, but they're all things that I can like, I'll just like shuffle them aside as a tool so that the next time I come across this similar situation, I'll still have these things. So.
Yeah, of course. I dig that. Now, one question I'm going to present, because this is the devil's advocate side, I guess. As the DM, why didn't you just let your large creature succeed so you could introduce that combat scenario or that engagement?
Well, I mean, I introduced the monster and the combat scenario, and the players had an unexpected way to resolve it that didn't require, what I had worked on. So, I mean, I think that's great. Like, I actually think that's brilliant. Like, I actually love designing an encounter or a situation, and then the players are like, what if we bypass it using this maneuver? And I'm like, perfect. Like, that's the exact time when you should be using those spells or maneuvers. Because like if you use a fear spell that targets one person in like a big combat, you're like, oh, one orc ran away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's still pretty helpful, but like this is the scene when it's awesome and you pull off this amazing maneuver and it worked. So
I like that. And like I said, I was only playing the devil's advocate there with that question because I am in the same camp as you are. As much as I love challenging my players with super difficult combat encounters, I absolutely love it when they go absolutely against expectations and find a way to solve the issue or bypass it within the first round, like a fear spell or charm or enchant, something that just doesn't seem like it should work, but it does, and I get excited for my players. I love that more than I feel bummed out about the encounter being bypassed.
Yeah. The bummage was minor. It was mainly because every like our group doesn't have like an aggressive like player versus GM mentality, but every once in a while we'll like play into that. Like they'll be like because it's got my dad in the group, and so like every once in a while my dad would be like, well, looks like I failed at raising a son, or like stuff
nice.
it's like way over the top, harsh, or
that's funny.
Like he'll just be like I'll roll a critical on him, and I'll be like, I know why your brother is my favorite. And
that's
like,
funny.
I'm using my dad as an example, but like there's lots of different like jabs back and forth, and so in this case, I was like, my monster. So it's all in very good nature. So.
That's great.
But the session didn't end there.
Okay.
So they kept going, and then there was a lull in the weather. And so the wind kind of died, and they were basically like, I knew as a GM that the weather was going to be still for 3 days. As players, they hadn't put any skills into like essentially like weather sense survival. So they could only tell 1 day ahead what the weather was going to be. So the players were like, oh, let's check what the weather is. Oh, it's going to be still the next day. And they're like, oh man, we're doomed. So they waited 1 day, and they're like, well, we'll wait 1 day. And then they're like, oh no, it's going to be still again the next day. And they just were absolutely losing their mind about the curse that Gluck had. They were like, just sitting on the ship was just a slow burn that just set them boiling. They didn't ask any of the captain or any of the crewmates about the weather.
No,
they didn't ask. They were just like, "All right, guys, we got to get out of here." And I thought that was really funny. I was like,
"That's great."
If you ask the captain, like these crewmates have better weather sense. Like they can tell you that it'll be a minor lull, and they were just like, "No, we're getting off this boat." And so they rowed themselves to shore. And so, like, their goal was to travel down the entire bay. They made it, like, a third of the way. So now they're going to trek it on foot. So,
nice.
It was interesting to see them. Like, I didn't really even have to do much. Really, I was just answering their questions, describing how the crew was getting a little nervous with the still water, and they drove themselves mad with worry about the curse. And I'd given them a bunch of hints about it being about the Dead Sea, and they were nowhere near the Dead Sea.
So I don't want to ruin any surprises here, but based on that alone, it sounds like for the curse to really be full effect, they actually have to be in the Dead Sea.
Are you looking for a D&D podcast with a dark side? Something more like Game of Thrones and less like Monty Python? Tale of the Manticore is part dark fantasy audio drama, part solo D&D RPG. There's no plot armor here. The dice make all the important decisions. Join me as I resurrect the excitement, wonder, and emotion of old school D&D. Made for a mature audience, Tale of the Manticore is both a fiction and a game. It's the story where chaos rolls.
Yeah, the curse is going to be much stronger in that direction, and anywhere it'll also be. So I described it as being near the Sea of the Dead, but it'll also be stronger near like any pirate strongholds, like any places where there are more pirate wreckage to be.
Yeah,
this curse will be stronger because it's about pirates. It's not as explicitly about the Sea of the Dead. There's just a lot of dead pirates in the Sea of the Dead. So
that makes sense. So realistically, where superstition would grow, this curse has become stronger.
Yep.
So I like that. Those aspects are really neat. It plays into the idea of things like regional effects based on certain legendary style creatures, which I've included in games before. So I think that's fantastic. Sounds like a great session.
And a great thing. What if like just random role playing, like a couple of my players, one of them is like a monster hunter character style, and they were having a chit chat, like just a role playing one, and one of the characters asked them about monsters in the sea, and this player just is great. They just off the top of their head they made up a sea monster, and they were like describing it. I was just like listening to it, and I rolled a monster lore check like in the background, and they succeeded, and I was like, I do have a serpent later. And so I reskinned the serpent like on their description. It worked great. It was this awesome. Nice. It was a yellow-eyed skink, and it's a sea monster that like generates an abnormal amount of heat, and it dissipates that like one off of its skin, so the water around it will be slightly warmer, which allows it to survive in like more colder climates, which is great because we were in a colder climate. And then the other thing is its main heat will vent off of its fin, and when it's near the near the surface, it'll create large banks of fog. And large banks of fog also happen to be one of the rumors for the curse.
Nice.
And I was like, oh my god, the sea monster is perfect. And so when I introduced the sea monster, I first introduced the bank of fog, and the players were like, and then someone was like, sea monster! And they're like, hey, that's the sea monster Sawyer described. And then the rest was history. But
I like that.
It was a fun session.
Did your player describe the sea monster prior then? So he wasn't like, hey, we see something, let me make the monster check, give me the information, I relay that to the party. He was like, hey, this is the legend, and you made the background check. He says, all right, cool. And then just reskin something to fit his description.
Yeah, I hadn't really skinned the sea monster. I was just kind of like, yeah, it's a generic sea monster, and I'll describe it as being serpenty and whatnot. But then in the bonfire session to start our game, they had this discussion where Sawyer's character was talking about sea monsters. I was like, oh, this is great. This is perfect. So,
yeah, I think that's masterful DMing right there, by the way, because the player was going off the cuff, and you took what he said and made it reality in your game. That is something that most players end up experiencing rarely, because it's usually, hey, I see something, let me make the check. What do I see? And the DM just tells them, they relay that to the party. So,
yeah, I really like it for a lot of skills that are kind of in fields that I'm not crazy familiar with, or don't even think to research, like hunting. Like sometimes the players are like, oh, I want to go hunt something in this region. And I'm like, oh man, I kind of know the biome, like, but I might as well just like have them make up a creature, or plants. They can make up the plant, and then I also like know where they're coming from, or if they're hoping for like certain abilities or uses.
Yeah.
So yeah, it helps populate the world, gets them more engaged, and also areas of prep I'm not usually prepared for. So it's like, sure, great.
I like that. I like that. It's you want to hear one of my small tips that I like to do when it comes to skill checks, especially like diplomacy or persuasion, social skill checks?
No.
You don't want to hear my tip?
No, yeah, I want to hear it. I just wanted to see what you'd say if I said no.
That's all right. I appreciate it.
Yeah, what's your tip?
So my theory is that their social skills will always tend to be successful, and the DC is really just how the NPC is going to react. So if they make a social skill, like they'll go on and on, like, all right, make a diplomacy check, and we're going to see how the guy just reacts to this. It's not to see if they're successful or not. It's only to see how the NPC reacts. So that way they're always that way they don't fail, because some players like to go really in depth, and you can't give a great speech and then roll a 2 and fail, because that sucks.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also sometimes a fan of rolling first, and then building off that. So
I am used to that. However, my players tend to get involved in role play enough where they're like, "Oh shit, I should make a roll." I'm like, all right.
yeah, no, but that is, I think, the best way to do it as well. I mean, success or failure, right? Like, if for a social check,
Right. In my theory is social checks, there's not really a fail. There's just what direction is this guy's reaction going to go?
yeah, it's
So,
also like social checks aren't really a binary like
right.
you have succeeded. Like, I mean, maybe it might feel like that sometimes. You're like, you have succeeded in speaking with your coworker. Congrats.
They do feel like that at times. Awesome. So let's jump into this review of Universal Soldier. What are your first thoughts?
Well, so it's comprised of 5 different parts, right? It's got an introduction to the Universal Soldier and like what the world means. It's got extra hero options like classes, feats, backgrounds. I mean, just equipment.
Yep.
It's got a couple new rules for like how the world works, contacts and surgery. It's got a little bit of game master advice, which I think is great, and it's got an adventure in it, like kind of themed Universal Soldier. And then part 6 is recognizing heroes and pre-generated stuff. But do you want to talk about what Universal Soldier is for people that don't know? I've never watched this movie.
Universal Soldier is a 1980s action movie starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. And it is the idea that they take living soldiers that have recently perished within the war at the time and convert them over to cybernetic based what's the word I'm looking for? Not bionic soldiers. So very similar to the idea of cyborg, only with more flesh than machine that's visible. And realistically, the series itself of film has gone on for far too long. They have jumped over way than enough sharks. But the first film set the groundwork, and it was really fun. There are a lot of good scenes in it that I remember, but trying to make sure we delineate between the fact that this is not a movie review, but a game review, to say that the big difference here, I'm going to be able to talk about a few other things, Eli, is that you've got the digital copy. I got the source book itself. So I have the physical copy. First impression for me is that while it comes in at 112 pages total, not including the covers, it's heavy, it's thick, it feels good in your hand. And one of the things I really appreciate, as you had mentioned, is that
soft cover, by the way.
Yes, soft cover. That they added to the Everyday Heroes core rule by adding in those extra feats, classes, and the contact rules, etc. So they added to the game. And that's something you really like to see. We've talked about it a few different times. When people make source books, include something that adds to the game somehow. Universal Soldier really does that. One of the things that I thought was really neat is that there are other like body enhancements or skin enhancements, things that play into the idea of the Universal Soldier and bionic replacements, which is really cool. The fact that they included it, they have actual mechanical purposes, reasonings, values, and striking forces, which I dig. But
what did you like? Because I don't play a lot of 5th edition D&D, so I kind of looked at the abilities and went, cool, great. Like, they've added them. I have no idea. Like, I didn't really look to see if they were any good. Like, they seemed on brand, for Universal Soldier. But like, what did you think of them? Did you think any of them were like unprecedented, overpowered? Like, any comments on them?
One of the things that I really appreciate is that the system and the team behind the system and the source books and everything have taken time to really make sure things feel balanced and well played out. So you don't feel like you're going down a path that is overly optimized compared to every other character. Um, but it still allows for a very good role playability when it comes to skills and abilities or feats or customization for characters that's solely placed on the player's shoulders. So a lot of them mechanically they're good, but the player's the one that's ultimately going to be able to make or break the system based on how and when they use certain abilities and skills. But
I think like all the cybernetics, I'm pretty sure they're all like they're all locked behind having a couple feats. I think because you need to have strain to like you need to be able to like handle the amount of cyberware that you're blending into yourself.
Mhm.
And that's the mechanics behind like you have to take feats to increase your strain to get more cybernetics. So like you could see you using this even in like an everyday hero, a normal game if you're trying to add cybernetics.
Yes, and that's one thing that I really like in how they decided to work that because by saying, "Hey, you have to take a feat option to unlock this section," it makes it accessible for both in-character games for the material itself as well as the compatibility with the core game. Which is also a really big thing that they have included in all of their previous adventures. So that is a huge win. I will say the bummer that I experience a little bit is
Okay.
that out of 112 pages, the adventure itself comes in at like 37.
Yeah, I feel like that's on brand for building an adventure into like also a source book because it's 113 pages. 2/3 of it is new stuff, and 1/3 is an adventure. Um,
Putting it like that, I guess that makes sense.
yeah, I would have liked the adventure to be a little bit better. A lot of my notes are on the adventure because I think the adventure has some really good bones, but like some of the ways they've chosen to implement it, I'm not a fan of.
Well, let's hear about it. I mean, we've
Do
talked.
we want to talk? Let's talk about we can talk about the other aspects before because the adventure is the last part um, we can get to. Because
Yeah.
what did you think about the new rules they added? So they added surgery and contracts.
So
And surgery makes sense. Like this is just you have cybernetics. Here's how long it kind of takes to do it. Voila. What do you think of contacts?
so I've played games that have contacts before. In fact, one of my favorite games, Marvel Superheroes, the TSR game from the 1984, 1987 range, had the idea of contacts. You started off with a contact. You can call upon that contact at just about any time you need to get information, etc. Um, I like the system of contacts and putting a rule set in a game to have contacts helps expand the I would say realistic usability of a character. Because at some point you're going to say, damn, I wish I could contact somebody in an age of cell phones where you have technology and skin grafts and cybernetic implants. You'd be able to call up just about anybody that you know. So giving a contact rule allowing for that opportunity is fantastic.
Yeah, so it
The
looks like you break down their contact into equipment, position, or skill.
Mhm.
That's kind of the ratings you have.
Yep, and being able to call upon those essentially skills, it makes the game flow and feel a little better. Similar to how people will use the um, homebrew rule. I know a guy. Have you heard of that one?
Yeah, that's kind of what this contact. I keep saying
Yes.
contract.
Right.
That's what the
Contact.
contact is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that. I mean, hey, I know a guy. I've got a guy who can help me out. Um, and it's not as basic as hey, you use I know a guy and you get advantage on these rolls for a little while. There's a little bit more behind it, and that meat gives it weight. That weight and responsibility gives it meaning, and then it becomes a more powerful aspect. And that is something that a lot of games don't generally add into. So having everyday heroes have the entire rule set kind of spelled out for you makes sense. I like it. And Universal Soldier being I don't want to say team-based game because that's quite incorrectly described, but when you think about military-based style games, usually you are a unit of soldiers. So multiple contacts between multiple different people makes sense, and that cohesion um, between the party glues it into the world you're playing in with contacts. I like it.
Yeah, I think context. I mean, just like me allowing my players to like build a sea monster essentially, or like describe plants or what they're hunting.
Mhm.
This is a similar way that you can have the players introduce NPCs they want to interact with. It's just more knowledge on how they want to interact with the world and
Mhm.
like their tone. Um, yeah, I think it's always a good idea. I think if you're playing any sort of D&D or like fantasy game and you don't have like a contact style mechanic, you should like it's one of the easiest house rules to add in. You should probably just add it. I mean, gives your players a lot more agency.
Yeah, absolutely. And realistically, if you spend any amount of time with any amount of NPCs, you would likely develop at least a working relationship. So you would have a contact by just sheer nature. Being able to reach out is awesome. Again,
What
I
did
like the fact that
you
I include it.
Yeah. What do you think about the game master advice?
Uh, so there are parts that I dig, and there are parts that feel um, I I don't want to say out of place. I want to say that
Okay.
it feels I don't know how to describe it. And that sounds really bad. The Game Master advice has a lot of awesome. Actually, it's all awesome. But coming from an older generation of gaming, I didn't need the fade to black because that seems like it's common sense. But it's not. It's not common sense for everybody. But when I come across something that feels obvious, I'm like, oh man, we didn't have to include this, but we do. So those things that have that juxtaposition to my own mentality. Um,
The fade to black part is not. I don't think it's in the game master advice. I think it is
is it? Am
in.
I?
That's in the very first page. The introduction starts with like a comfort and safety, and then a fade to black tool.
Oh, you see, I
Um,
think I remember the fade to black coming up in sort of middle of the book here.
Well, I
But
think it's great that they've got it on like the first page because they basically tell you flat up like this game has a lot of these themes, a lot of loss of
hmm
memory, mind control, loss of free will, replacing body parts, surgery and implants, involuntary
yeah,
surgery, right? Like so if any of those are things that like you as a player are uncomfortable with or as game master you're uncomfortable with, might not be the best like you might not want to run a universal soldier game.
right.
Some of the mechanics are cool in it, but like these are strong themes. But it does say like a good helpful tool if you do want to try like play one of these games and try to avoid these hard ones is the fade to black. So
Yes, yes. Other than that, I mean, I think the Game Master advice itself, as I'm flipping through the book again, um, is one of those things that advice is great. I like having it here. Um, here we go. The fade to black tool is the one I was thinking about. Comes in at page 55 under
it's also on
storytelling and
page
themes.
1.
So
Oh,
yeah,
this is where they have like they put a lot more details in.
yeah, yeah. So there's the huge difference right there. Um,
Oh,
that's
that's because that's in the adventure. That's built into the adventure part, which is
yep.
funny that they didn't build it just into the GMing advice. It seems like very solid GMing advice. But I mean, I guess by building it into the adventure, um, you probably should be reading the adventure if you're reading this book to get a like. It's helpful to learn like what a sample adventure should be like.
Yep, yep. Other things, which we can talk a little bit about some of the technicalities here. In Game Master Advice, they introduced the idea of billionaires. And the reason that sounds weird is because billionaires exists in reality, in everyday life. Usually heroes don't fall under that category, but you have your Tony Starks, etc. Everyday heroes uses a wealth system that is not coin based. They use tiers, essentially, wealth class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And anything that falls within that respectable wealth class, you should be able to purchase without an issue. Billionaires takes it up to wealth class 6. So I like that they have a framework for something that's a little higher than what you would consider standard for the game rules. That underneath the tools just gives you a little bit more framework on how to do things. Also, things like adding extra, I think it was favors. I wanted to say flavors for a second, but extra favors or new cybernetics for creating your own in case there are things that aren't necessarily compounded or found in the book already is great. Having that tool allows people to use their creativity and freedom. Having the framework to build those, I mean, come on, everybody knows that eventually someone's like, you know what? Nothing in this book fits. I want frog-style acrobatic legs.
I wonder if this font is dyslexic friendly because we have been making, or if we're just on one today.
We might just be on one today.
I don't know how to check how a font is dyslexic friendly. I don't know, but yeah, the GMing advice isn't really like how to be a better GM in general, but more specifically for like GM tools, like in this game, like running like crazy, like technological marvels that you can introduce in your game that the villains are using, or
right.
Maybe
now,
even that a player has here or there.
I think that's actually a really decent point that we can make here, where it's called Game Master Advice. I like the idea of possibly rephrasing that as Game Master Tools.
Yeah, because it's got a lot of like tools for adventure ideas, like sample adventure, suggested adventures with like the type of hook you should use, the type of player that should be used. Like this adventure is good for a billionaire hero, or this adventure is really good for, whatever.
Yeah.
So, and then it's also got kind of, it briefly describes the action that might take place.
Yeah, it's well written, it's thoughtful, and it helps. It's thorough, which is all really, really good. I will say that as I'm flipping through the book, one of the things that everybody's going to notice, but it's going to be subtle, is that it's a standard book. So its layout, its design, it's pretty standard. 2-column, decent size, probably between 10 to 11 sized font for most of it. Well spaced, easy readouts, callouts are good. All of those things play into the idea of making the adventure, the cinematic source book, more accessible. So maybe it's not a dyslexic friendly font, but it's at least laid out in a format that you're familiar with already, if you're familiar with any other RPG books.
Yeah, I personally am not crazy about the style of art that they use. It's like the kind of 3D-esque, like animated. And I just kind of have a general gripe with, I always feel like every time I look at that art, like it feels like the characters have been like cut and pasted into like a background image. And I'm just like not always a fan of it. But I do like some of the art, like the art on page 51, the very start of the adventure. Like they got a picture of a soldier with a bunch of bullets in their bullet holes, and they're like being worked on by some doctors, and like I like that art. But
yeah,
most of the art is just a little off for me, but I don't think the art's, it's just not my style.
That's all right. I will say that as we go through, there are some people who are super critical of the artwork, and that's okay. It's okay to be critical of the artwork. Everybody has their own flavor. Everybody has their own style, flair, and tastes. But you might notice that there appears to be multiple different art styles in the book.
Yes.
There are some that are a little bit more 3D-esque. There are some that are a little bit more realistic. There are some that are a little bit more artistic looking.
Yeah, they do a good job of blending the styles. So it's not like I hate all of the art, but it's just like there's a couple of these and I'm like, man.
Right. But that's okay because again, we all have personal preferences, flavors, styles, things that we like more. So that's cool. Now, about the adventure itself, you had some notes that you wanted to cover.
Yeah. I mean, but like before we get into that, I don't think this PDF is hyperlinked.
Oh, it might not be.
Oh no, the adventure, it's the table of credits is, but any other references?
So it's not. I think Well, there's no actual interlinking of the content. The table of contents is at least hyperlinked to chapters.
Yeah, at least the table of contents is hyperlinked, but I would have, especially one where you've got like quite a lot of, like because you're like referencing like weapons earlier in the book. Yeah, it's not the most hyperlinked thing in the world, but it's fine. It does do a good job of like referencing the page numbers in the player's handbook, which I think is great.
That's really important, by the way. A lot of people, a lot of publishers don't include page numbers. It's like, hey, just go find it in the book. I'm like, great. Where do I have to look in the book now? I gotta get a second book. I gotta flip through that. So it's nice.
Okay, yeah. Then we're on to the adventure. Escape from Eden. Isn't that what it's
Yes. Yes, Return to Eden, I believe.
Or Return to Eden. Return to Eden. It's if I read it correctly, right? The players are a bunch of Universal soldiers, who are set on a mission to stop one of the Dr. Sharp, who is like trying to work on more Universal soldiers and like provide it to everyone, sort of thing. So that's the Eden, full of like we're selling immortality essentially, and the players have to go in, stop them. They go through like Miami and into the Keys. So
yeah,
that's the synopsis, right? That's of the adventure.
Yeah, quick and dirty. It's nothing major there. Realistically, I like the way the adventure rolls out. It's natural to read. It's similar to a lot of writing styles that you see. One of the cool things that the adventure has is it's broken into 3 acts, technically 4 because there's Act 1A and 1B. But at the beginning of the act, you get the quick synopsis of kind of the things that are going down within the act. You get some of the information about some of the locations, and then you eventually get to the read alouds. So there are less read alouds, there's more content, there's more informational paragraphs for the game master.
Before we just on this synopsis real quick.
Okay.
The players are kind of the bad guys.
I mean, perspective's everything.
Dr. Sharp is basically, he's got this holistic, like, he wants to introduce, like, if you die, you can come back to life. And he wants to introduce it, like, commercially worldwide. And, like, Helix, the company that has, like, Universal Soldier patents, is, like, pleads with the U.S. government, like, stop him. So, I mean, it kind of seems like the players are corporate soldiers, like going to bust down this scientist. So it can be a little. You can be kind of bad. So
again, perspective. I mean, to be fair, in relating to the film, the soldiers themselves were not necessarily the good guys. They were enforcers for whatever they were sent out to do, private contracted, etc. But perspective's still key. because corporate monopolies on this are bad. And of course, we want to stop them.
Well, the reason why I bring it up is going through it, I don't know if there's like the whole concept of the Universal Soldier adventure, right? Is you like start questioning what's actually happening to you because your memories have been wiped, and you're like rediscovering yourself, like kind of Total Recall s.
Yep.
I don't think that there's a way that you can team, like you can't really team up with Dr. Sharp. Like, is there is a like an ending where it's like, what happens if the players fail? But there isn't really a what happens if the players choose. Like it's kind of like, oh well then, okay.
Now, see, that's again one of the things I really like that they'd built into the adventure is that many of their sections will detail a challenge, and if there's a success or if there's a failure, they provide +2 or advantage or -2 disadvantage, etc. to certain things. But they also allow for that same to give you the fallout of what's going to happen. While it's all geared up to run an adventure, and we talked about this actually when I was mentioning I was writing an adventure for Everyday Heroes. I had a problem delineating the linear aspect to an entire party. Adventures are designed to be linear, just like you had said to me then. They're designed to start at point A to follow to point B. And when you get to something that deviates so you kind of cover all paths, it becomes difficult.
I did discover the Dr. Sharp plans to kill all of Miami and then revivify them as zombies. So that's the bad part about him.
See, corporate greed, horrible.
Yeah.
But that linear storytelling is the nature of source books and adventures, but it's not bad, and you can choose to fail in any of these aspects. So if you wanted to essentially side with the bad guy and let him get away with it, which would be total key for like Universal Soldier 3, not a big deal. You can pull out your own punches.
Yeah, and like if you do it, it basically says the players just die. So I mean, I guess it's okay for a one shot, but would have liked a little bit more there, just a little bit.
Again, the nature of linear storytelling, we only have a general path. They set up the bad guy, they put us on our way, and it still allows for us to have a sense of self-discovery, because you're right, Universal Soldiers have their minds wiped, etc. Some go hard into their new life, and others have fragments of their past start to infiltrate and break through the barriers, and they become closer to their previous living bodies than their new augmented bodies.
So what do you think about this adventure?
I think it's fun. I think that there are a lot of really neat aspects to it. I think time-wise, we would probably end up shooting through it in about 6 to 7 hours if we were taking our time. So 2-3 sessions at most. I don't know.
Yeah, I think this maybe could be 4 sessions, maybe, but
maybe
seems pretty quick.
Yeah, it does feel quick, but again, I mean, we're looking at what, 37-ish pages.
Yeah.
Yet highly skilled writers are behind it. It feels well put together. It seems to flow well, and content organization is natural. So it's not like I'm hunting through the book constantly to get the right vibe or the right direction. I like it.
I like it starts with like a very it notes that it's partnered with Sirenscape, who I love, for audio. So if you want to have like an audio accompaniment with this adventure, you can check out Sirenscape, which is really cool.
QR code right in the front cover.
And then it also wants you to encourage that. It tells players to pick a theme song when you're creating characters, and then create a soundtrack of your sessions as you play, so that you can listen to, and you can kind of have like that, theme songs running through the session. Players can be like listening to the music and think about the game.
Nice.
That's cool. Yep. The adventure starts with like a hot drop where it just drops you in to a situation, which I think is great.
Yes.
And then they also have like what's really fun is this hot drop is very narrative. Like, you know, there's not a huge amount of mechanics. But it's generally allows the players to narrate a lot of what's actually happening and how they're succeeding.
Yes. And that I think is phenomenal. You in one of the sections for one of them dropping in from the helicopter, they all make their skill checks. It says in the book it should be an easy skill check. They drop in, they succeed. Let them be friggin' awesome. They succeed. They only fail if they fail the ridiculously low skill check and then the helicopter crashes and they're noticed. Otherwise it's a success.
Yeah, because the whole idea of this narrative scene is really just to introduce that they're universal soldiers, show that some of them are cracking, and then have them essentially blow up on their way. Like they get stopped and they all get killed, right? And then that way later when they wake up, they're like, "What? We've died before." They're our same characters. But I do think it's funny that they're like, "Hey, play 5th edition. Here's a scenario that does not use 5th edition's like any of it." Like, so I think that's kind of funny.
Hey, while Everyday Heroes is compatible with 5th edition, the core rulebook covers all of the ground rules that you need to play. So I mean, while
Right, but this isn't even like anything 5th edition related. Like playing
right,
this is like it's just like playing playing another narrative system. So
right,
like lasers and feelings. This is how lasers and feelings games would go.
nice.
I do hate that they've got this hot drop into the action scene, and then the very first scene is the same equivalent as meeting at a tavern. You all fly into an airport and meet an agent. And I'm kind of like, I just like flip the table. I'm like, you have this great like hot drop scene. You know to use a hot drop scene to get people into your game. And then your first session is just like so majorly disliked that.
I understand where you're coming from. For me, on the flip side, it's just, I mean, it is the belly of the beast. I mean, you got to get from point A to point B somehow, and as essentially government agents flying into an airport, meeting with some form of contact, it's how things work out. It's the way it's done in movies. It's the way it's done in books. You're right that it is such standard fare for fantasy-based games, but here it at least makes sense, you know. And it's not like they wrote it poorly.
I mean, kind of, but like the thing about this whole part is it doesn't like tell your players like, oh, here's what you're expecting, and then you go there and you're like, oh, so we know to go to the the baggage area. You're really just like riding the train, and I mean it's fine for an intro adventure, but
Right. Still,
just,
I mean,
yeah, not
your favorite part.
not a favorite.
That's okay.
Because like I think a lot of this, like a lot of the exposition that they're giving in the first scene, like if it's all things that the players should know, like arriving, you should just have them know that, and then you've got like it's even fine to like give them this information up front, and then have this agent that they can talk to if they're asking clarifying questions, like to get more information. But then they actually have a starting point, because like at this point it's just all exposition dump. And I don't think they're helping themselves with that.
I can agree with how you've worded it then and this way. And I like the idea of a sourcebook and adventure, while intended to be ran as is in order as done. It's also a great starting point. You read the adventure first, you can modify it. So you are easily able to say, you know what, that doesn't quite work the way I would envision it. I would give them this information first and then meet the agent. Just as you set up in your scenario. That's how source books are really used a lot of the times, aren't they? Do you run them constantly word for word in order, or do you modify them to fit the way you feel it flows better?
I mean, I think you you always modify it a little bit, but like you generally try to hit the same, like, when they give you an encounter, you still try to hit that encounter. Just sometimes you're changing small details here and there. But I think like major rewrites, like you're like not really running the encounter, like you're not really running it.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. I dig it. So we've talked a little bit about how the encounter begins. How do you feel about how the encounter ends?
So it's kind of got an investigative scene. Like the first act is all investigative. You're looking into Dr. Sharp's connections, and overall, I was a little bit like not impressed with some of these encounters. I just felt like all of them were just you fight and that's it. And I just thought they were super boring.
To be fair,
like I get that it's called Everyday Heroes, but you're playing soldiers, and some of these encounters are like they're geared towards heroes, where a hero would jump in, but as a soldier, like you're not obligated to do anything about this. So like I get the I didn't feel a pull. Like I read through the encounters and I was like, yeah, I don't know if I'm a player if I'm just like, oh yeah, okay, like whatever.
Now, that might be a personal disconnect between Eli and the source material, because in the source material, not the source book, but like the film and whatnot, you see those ridiculous heroic actions where the soldier still takes it above and beyond, super soldier style, Captain America style, goes in to save everything. So whereas heroes would do that, you do see it in the films.
Yeah, but like reading through this source book, like reading through how they describe these characters, I don't get that from this source book.
Okay.
So yeah, I was kind of just like, eh.
Okay, that's fair. I like that there are at least potential outcomes. So as you get through the final encounter, they have, hey, if some of these things are, lined up, these are potential outcomes. So it's like a multi-possible ending.
Yeah.
Which I like that. That aspect is cool because that means that if you decide to replay it, you can make a few different decisions and essentially you're going to get a different game. That is not something that you see commonly in a lot of games. They're usually more static. So having that aspect is always a pleasure.
Yeah, and I mean, it does build in the effect of, oh yeah, you guys choose not to interact with these encounters. That's fine. And I thought that was good. It just seemed odd that like the first encounter that they had that weird split in like how I viewed the expectations versus how the adventure seemed to expect you to go.
Mm-hmm.
So, but for the other adventures or the other encounters, like when you start investigating around the keys, yeah, I mean, they're just all combat. Like,
yeah, and to be fair, the context of an action movie, that's likely what you would get regardless. So, I mean, it's not anything that's super far off base. If it was more of an adventure story, I would expect it to be different. But coming from an action story, again, I mean, it kind of hit what I was expecting. So
yeah, I guess I was seeing like a number of the like, sure, it's a combat encounter, but like a lot of the fail states were still like, oh, the players succeed. Like in one of them, like the players are getting beaten, and if they're getting beaten, someone shows up with a gun and saves them, and I'm like,
Now I think that right there also shows that you spend a lot of time in a deadly system, and you are A-okay with killing your players.
Right, but this isn't a deadly system. This is, or it actually is a deadly system because you have reincarnation. Like the entire, like Universal Soldier, like the entire first encounter, the whole principle is that they'll kill you. Like they want to kill you, and you can be killed. Lean into that. Instead, they're like, "Oh, you get saved." But no,
right. Why
bring
not
back more of the the mental fuckery that will build with.
right? Like, why not kill the party or a party member, and then essentially you bring them back, repair, reboot, and send them back out. But again, at that same point, now you technically be a new character with a new mind wipe. So
that's great.
That's
like what this entire adventure starts with.
A lot of people would have a hard time integrating a new mind wiped character into an existing party. Like,
well, that's why they're military. Like they're military. They're assigned the exact same person. Like, because they're reanimated, rebooted, and then now that player, quote unquote, doesn't know anything, but everyone else is like, wait, you don't remember us doing that? Like it would start to help build the disconnect of, wait, their mind got wiped.
See, I get where you're coming from in that aspect, and it feels like we're kind of nitpicking this small portion here. But if you take time to watch like the first two films, and the reason you got to stand into the second one is because the newly created soldiers in their new mind wipe and bionic are very susceptible to taking orders as they should be, but they're not good at thinking in the metaphysical aspect. They're not good at the conceptualization of certain ideas. They are very black and white. They're set up just like robots, black and white, yes or no, zeros or ones. So a party who have been adapting to the idea of humanization, or at least have become more humanized, when they see a party member who has been rebooted, essentially, they would say, oh, he's been rebooted, he doesn't know. End of story. Would be like, hey, why don't you remember this? It's, you were rebooted. Move on.
Yeah, but that's really not going to be what happens. That shouldn't be happening in this adventure, or in this concept, because the entire concept is that all of your characters are starting to slip. Like, they're not perfect soldiers, where they're starting to get back their old memories and they're starting to kind of question. And so having someone come back with a wiped mind, that starts to build them questioning more. Because your players are not going to be zeros and ones. Like, they're not going to read a military manual and then follow those instructions and go through this adventure with military precision. Like, there's no way. Even if you get a group of jarheads, they're going to be fucking up stuff, or going around messing with things. Like, that's just how RPGs are. They're messy.
You're right. And again, this is where we take the idea of a story-based narrative that has the external control of player characters versus a movie that's 100% scripted. So I see it. And yeah, building in that leeway would definitely be fun. And to create a more deadly style adventure where you could do things with that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I thought would be super helpful is the host of cast characters that they have at the end of the adventure, like the NPCs and pre-generated. But that's where I sort of fell a little flat. But
in the pre-generated stuff?
Actually, with the NPC of Luke Devereaux himself. Luke Devereaux was Jean-Claude Van Damme's character in the first Universal Soldier.
Oh, is this past the adventure in the pre-generated?
Yep, this is Key Heroes.
Well, I feel like we should finish out the adventure first.
It kind of has some bleed here, so
okay.
Follow me for a second.
What page is that on?
102.
102. Oh, down there. Okay.
All right. We've got his character set up. He's a strong brawler, comes in level 8, which that's all right. Everyday Heroes does not have a push to level 20. They stop at 10. So 8 is already high level for this particular game. But when you look at all of the rules that they've included, things like your cybernetics and how it causes strain, etc., his max strain is rated at 0. So all of these things cause 0 strain. They're good, but they don't feel true to the character. And when you have the idea of a hero coming in to save somebody, if they fall flat for me based on the source material to the translatable RPG source book.
So you're saying like you just want more cybernetics?
No, I want, that was just an example of where the disconnect, it doesn't feel like it truly encapsulates the material. So when we bring them into the adventure, they don't feel like the key hero. They feel like almost like a watered down version, which can in a way work because it helps the heroes, or the player characters feel more like the heroes. Like you don't ever want to be upstaged by an NPC all the time.
Which, speaking of that, they do that in this game, in this adventure.
Yes. And it can be hard. It can be hard for the players to deal with that, especially because it happens frequently. But the same time follows the material.
Yeah, I would have been fine with those pre-gens in the back, just being there. Whatever. But I do dislike that they included one of the like the character, like the special characters in Andrew Scott.
Yeah,
he's just spotlight stealing in the adventure.
And I mean, there are times and there are reasons on why that would be appropriate. Like you want to constantly upstage your players to create a disdain for them, or you want to create an absolute hatred that you want to make sure you finish them off by some absolute means. I didn't feel that way in the adventure. I felt like it was just going to outshine you, and it's for no real purpose other than to upstage you.
Yeah, like I would have been fine if Scott shows up and the fight is happening, and then he's like, "Get to the chopper, go!" But then the fact that he goes with you to the chopper and like he does the most awesome like chopper move, and like he's the one fighting between the choppers, and you kind of follow. Not a fan. Like,
right now, this is a small story that I used that I had done in one of my games in 2021, I believe. My party met an NPC who was trying to find collective heroes, and he used the line, "Well, gee, you guys remind me a lot of myself, and who would I rather have on a team of me than me?" So he was like, "Yes, you guys are the kind of people I'd like to see." Brought them all together, stepped outside the inn, and instantly was slain. He died by arrow shot to the head. So that NPC couldn't travel with them. I use that story because in this case, having Scott fall out of the helicopter, have him die, would have at least had a cinematic feel of we're in the thick of shit. Now we got to step up a little bit more. I would have liked to see something stronger.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, what do you rate this source book and this adventure?
I feel comfortable putting it pretty solidly at 8. I want to say that I know it's kind of crazy, but look at back when
out of 200,
out of 10, 8 out of 10. Look at back when we did the Crow, also for Everyday Heroes. It felt like they were starting to get their bearings, and Universal Soldiers feels like they have the flow down better. It feels more complete. It feels like it has a larger composition to it that is all inclusive. It is comprehensive from cover to cover. And I don't feel like there are too many major rewrites as a game master, just a few organizational things I would change up and a few of the story aspects. I think to play it from page 1 to 37 for the adventure itself straight through as is, it's fine. It's not my particular style, but I like things with a little flair. And this gives me a groundwork to jump off of without much change.
Yeah, I think if I'm just counting the source book aspect of it, I'd put it as like 7 out of 10. It seems like a good source book for Universal Soldier. It seems like something that would be fun to add in. It's fine. Like, it's not blowing my mind. But it's doing all right. For the adventure, I rate the adventure as like a 4 out of 10. Like, I just don't think it's that great of an adventure.
That's okay. Now,
like, I just don't even think it introduces like what they've got going on well. Like, it doesn't incorporate enough of the aspects of what they're adding. So I think that does bring the overall down a little bit. But I think if I was running like even a cyberpunky or some like a more advanced modern game, this would be fun to add in, because like even in a normal everyday heroes game, you could have a villain with some cool cybernetics, and that would be really cool. And this shows you how, like, or at least gives you some good examples of some cool cybernetics and how to blend it into your game without, like, because you can always just make up stuff. You can be like, this guy has a laser gun and it does this, but I mean, this has some codified ways of introducing it to your game that seem pretty balanced and thought out well. So
true. Yeah. And through your explanation, I understand that an 8 feels high for the source book itself. Yeah, I won't separate the idea of the adventure and the source book. I think overall 8 is where I would sit on it. However, quick math says that between a 7 on the source book and a 4 on the adventure is a 5.5 out of 10. So
yeah,
that
as 113 pages, that's what I put it at. I mean, but for me, as someone reading 5th edition stuff, I mean, I haven't really been blown away. Like, for me to rate something as like an 8 or a 10 as a whole product would be that'd be an insane product. So
that's fair. And again, while you may see this as super generous, you hit on a lot of the things that cause me and allow me to feel confident in 8. And that is, the cybernetic rules are transferable to the core rulebook of the game. You can utilize that in a homebrew style world. You can take it with other compatibility things. The secondary rules, the addition of higher wealth tiers, all of those first pages from page 1 to like 51 or something, those first 50 pages, all of that content is what really plays into my higher rating. For me to take it all the way to 10, I think the adventure would have to feel a little bit more action-packed, kick-ass, and a little more, I don't want to say universal soldiering, because they were able to nail the flair and the flavor for the players, but the story itself just feels like another action movie. And it's really hard.
Like, it's helpful. I mean, it is an action movie genre, but you can still have social scenes, you know, in a standoff that you're trying to work through. Like, you can still have, like, what is it in Die Hard? You know, there's all those different radio scenes where they're communicating, but there's no actual like way that they can fight. But they're like, you know, trying to get in each other's heads. Like, those are also ways that you can build encounters that even when you have highly military people, right? Like, if this guy sees him, he's going to shoot him. So how do you introduce a social situation where you can't be seen?
Now, I think what you have just mentioned, that comparison to Die Hard is absolutely fantastic. We don't have something like that built into the adventure. I mean, we don't have over calm style arguments. I mean, perception checks or investigation checks, or, hey, I'm just going to try to radio this guy. This is a radio engagement with the bad guy. Not the kind of thing that's really built in.
Well, and that's one thing that like I like a little bit dislike, is that there's like you get the gist that Sharp is a bad guy from the introduction, and then you kind of get the gist that Sharp's a bad guy because he's attacking you while you're investigating him. But I mean, like, when someone sends super soldiers at you, like you're like, oh, don't defend yourself. So like there's like more of that would help reinforce that he's a bad guy, like the megalomaniac gloating, or like more of that indiscriminate like zombification of people out and about, and you're like, oh no, we need to stop this guy. So
That's true. That's true. I think adding in additional clarity in game, not just in informational paragraphs, but in the game, would really help. Something that will codify the not villainity, but the villain-esque nature of the bad guy. Because you get that in films, you get that in books, but you have to spell it out in an adventure, only because players do not always come across it by their own way. So you have to write it.
Show, not tell. So.
Yeah, I dig it. Otherwise, it's fun. I enjoy the material. I think it fits in with Everyday Heroes, which we both agreed quite a while ago does 5e better than 5e does. So it's something I would recommend, especially if you enjoy the idea of either cybernetic style warriors or the Universal Soldier world, as well as cinematic style roleplay, because this fits in pretty well. For our listeners, you can pick it up at evilgeniusgames.com or find it hopefully in your local bookstores. Otherwise, Eli, do we have anything that we want to close out our episode with?
Have a good holiday season.
Absolutely. Have fun. Be safe. We got a few more episodes before the new year. You can always find us on Facebook or online at epictablegames.com. Check out some of our awesome adventures for 5th edition and the Open Gaming Network for your Everyday Heroes, SRD rules, and needs.
And next week we are going to be reviewing Everyday Heroes Rambo.
Yeah, that's the hope. And I'm actually really looking forward to this one because Rambo is like an iconic, quintessential style military hero in a lot of circles, whereas Universal Soldier really came in on a more unknown radar.
Yeah, Universal Soldier is a little bit more niche. Rambo, I've actually seen Rambo.
Then we are going to have a lot to discuss. All right, guys, we'll see you next week.
Pedro first RPG.
Okay, new intro. We've changed the name, and we're still using the word paladin. Paladin. I mean, it hasn't been used in the English language in about 200 years, but okay.